introduce myself. My name is Katherine Hackett. I am a graduate student in clinical psychology at Temple University, coming specifically from the cognitive neuropsychology lab. And our lab's mission is really to develop theories of everyday functioning in the context of age-related neurodegeneration. And my research interests specifically are using new technologies to address gaps in existing methods of assessment and intervention. So that's the first slide there, so we can go ahead and skip ahead. So the question that we're interested in really is the fact that as the aging population continues to grow, the number of people who are affected by dementia is expected to drastically increase over time. And we know now that lifestyle interventions and pharmacologic interventions as well are increasingly effective when they're administered earlier on. So a main priority in our field has really become efficient and early detection of pathological change. However, existing methods like biomarker testing and traditional comprehensive neuropsychological assessment have many drawbacks, which I don't have time to get into, but there are many. So we believe that digital phenotyping has a lot of promise to address some of these existing drawbacks and afford greater accessibility, scalability, and really the ability to capture everyday behaviors outside of the constrained laboratory or clinic setting, as we've been talking about. Now, there have been a few studies that have so far looked at the correspondence between digital markers and traditional measures of cognition, but so far they've been primarily focused on healthy populations, and they have lacked a priori hypotheses, which represents a major gap. So we believe that the use of empirical frameworks to guide our hypotheses and interpretation is especially relevant when we're working with constantly evolving hardware and software and large-scale data. So what we did is we reviewed the literature and we developed a theoretical framework that integrates trends in pathological decline, and we're going to be using that framework in an ongoing digital phenotyping study. So I'll try to go through this briefly. So on mean levels of cognitive test performance, starting from the left, we expect subtle declines in normal aging, followed by more notable decrements that are usually constrained to a few cognitive domains in that intermediate mild cognitive impairment or MCI phase. And then as individuals progress from MCI to dementia, we see more severe impairments across the majority of cognitive domains. Now, in terms of variability on cognitive test performance, we do see increased variability in healthy older adults as compared to younger adults, followed by even more variability in MCI as those reserve mechanisms kick in to compensate for early difficulties. And we also see at this phase that increased variability predicts even further decline. And then at later stages, all the way on the right, some studies show that variability actually peaks at MCI and then declines as individuals become more impaired, whereas other studies show a continued stepwise increase in variability. We propose that what happens to variability at these later stages may depend on the difficulty of the task and other psychometric factors. Then on everyday functioning, we first see very subtle errors of inefficiency that are usually compensated without issue. In MCI, individuals remain independent, but they start to have noticeable difficulties with complex tasks, for example, finances. They're also more variable in activities like walking and medication use. And then in later stages, we see notable impairment on even very basic activities of daily living, which is also reflected in sensor studies by fewer outings and reduced mobility. So we can interpret the trends that we see in early decline from the perspective of graceful degradation, which is a term some of you might be familiar with from computational science that describes how complex systems maintain functionality in the face of mild damage. So we see this with inefficiencies and variability early on in the pathological change process instead of outright failure. So this pattern may be due to faulty executive control mechanisms from the prefrontal cortex that are necessary to modulate goal activations, enable smooth transitions, and inhibit distractors, or from the perspective of the resource theory, which posits that early damage depletes overall resources, leading to errors and recruitment of compensatory strategies. So taken together, we propose the variability in everyday behavior model, or the VIBE model. So in terms of activity, looking at the purple line, we predict a gradual followed by a quickening decline in activity metrics. So as mean cognitive performance declines, so will proxies for function, sociability, mood, and mobility. In terms of variability, so the blue line, we predict two scenarios. On complex tasks, we predict an inverted U-shaped curve, such that variability in digital measures peaks at mild cognitive impairment, whereas on simpler tasks, we predict a continued increase in variability, so that dotted line past MCI. So we're using the VIBE model in the context of an ongoing study with 3 groups of older adults ranging from normal control to dementia. We're going to be using the MindLamp platform to evaluate our digital phenotyping variables against gold standard neuropsych measures. And we're going to be testing our predictions using a general linear model framework. And our participants in the study will complete a baseline visit to obtain those gold standard neuropsych and functional measures. They will then download the MindLamp app on their phone, their own personal phone. It will passively obtain sensor data for a period of 4 weeks. And we're going to be focusing on the mobility, sociability, and device activity features. We're also going to ask participants to complete a 5-question nightly survey to capture some additional contextual data about each day. So I'll just end by saying that our recruitment is still ongoing, but we're really excited to kick off this study in the next month. We're looking forward to presenting our results sometime in the future. And I wanted to thank everyone here, especially my incredible mentor, Dr. Tanya Giovanetti, who's a board certified neuropsychologist, and our amazing collaborator, Ian Barnett at Penn, who I believe has worked closely with Dr. Anila. So thanks.